Greetings. I am Paul Miles, and this is Season 2, Episode 11 of The Thursday Show. We are going through the book of Genesis. Last week, we started in Genesis 3:21 with Adam and Eve departing from the Garden of Eden, and we went through the drama with Cain and Abel, starting in chapter 4. This week, we are picking up in 4:16 with Cain's departure of his own. As we announced last time, the Q&A portions of the Thursday show, which we used to do, are it's changing format a little bit. We'll be saving up questions and answers to do a special Thursday show episode. So if you have any questions, please send them in. Genesis 4:16. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Okay, it says that Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. How can that be? God is omnipresent. Is it possible to get out of his presence? That God is omnipresent is evident, for example, in Psalm 139. Now, the first couple verses will attest to his omniscience, that is his all-knowingness. Omnipresent means he is everywhere. Omniscient means that he knows everything. So in Psalm 139, we see, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I get up. You understand my thought from far off. You search my path and my lying down and are aware of all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it fully. All right. Now that's interesting. You understand my thought from far off. Okay, does that say that God is distant and not here with me? He only knows what I'm thinking? Well, let's read further. You put yourself behind and before me and keep your hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is lofty, I cannot fathom it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bowl in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings in the morning and dwell into the sea, even there your hand shall guide me. And your right hand shall take hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light shall be as night about me, even the darkness is not dark to you, but the night shines as day, for the darkness is like light to you. Okay, so here David is combining the elements of omniscience and the concept of omnipresence, right? Everywhere I go, you are there. Where shall I flee from your presence? Well, it says here that Cain did flee from the presence. So is God omnipresent? Is he everywhere? Or is he not? This is where the doctrine of immediacy comes into play. So the doctrine of immediacy recognizes that while God is omnipresent, there are some places where his presence is different from other places. So for example, if we take a look in the tabernacle or the temple, we have the outer courtyard, and God is present in the outer courtyard. He is present all throughout Israel. He is present everywhere. But then we get to the holy place. Now, the holy place is holier than the outer courtyard. Not everyone can just trample on into the holy place and have a good old time, right? Well, that's because there is an increase of God's immediacy at the holy place. And then if we go further to the most holy place, we have an even greater degree of God's immediacy. So God can be omnipresent everywhere and still have a localized presence for the Shekinah glory. God can be omnipresent, he can be everywhere, and still walk in the Garden of Eden, for example. God can be omnipresent and still be on the cross. Okay, there are degrees of immediacy there. So when it says that Cain left the presence of Jehovah, presence of the Lord, the presence of Yahweh, This does not mean that he escaped to a place where God could no longer see him. No, it means that he has cut off fellowship with God. He is in a place where God will not commune with him, but God is still omnipresent. Okay, so Cain has departed from the fellowship, if we will, of God. And where does he go? To the land of Nod, which is east of Eden. Now, this Hebrew word nod means vagrancy. It is the same word that is translated wanderer in Genesis 4:12 and vagabond in Genesis 4:14. Remember when God said to Cain, from now on, when you till the ground, it will not yield for you its best. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, a nod on the earth. Then Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. You have driven me out of this day from the face of the earth, and from your face I will be hidden. Okay, from your face I will be hidden. There's another reference to this doctrine of immediacy, right? Cain will not have this interpersonal relationship, fellowship with God. As it stands, God can come up and chit-chat with Cain, tell him, hey, sin is crouching at the door. You need to watch yourself. And whenever Cain messes up, God can come down and talk with him. But now Cain is saying, we're not going to have that anymore. From your face I will be hidden. You'll still know everything that I do, of course. God was not standing there in the sense that he is here in verse 13 when Cain killed his brother. But God came to him in that sense and then talked to him, and God already knew. So in that sense, though, Cain and God are going to have their fellowship broken. And I will be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. Vagabond, again, that's the word node. No. It will happen to anyone who finds me will kill me. And then we got into all that last time. Okay. So he goes to this land of Nod, the land of the vagabond, the land of the wanderer. Where is the land of Nod, the land of vagancy? It says that it was east of Eden. Okay, now that's interesting. What do we know about east of Eden? Well, let's go back to Genesis 2:8. The Lord God planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he placed the man whom he had formed. Okay, so that's where the Garden of Eden was. Then, of course, the drama goes down with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then in Genesis 3:24 says that God drove the man out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword, which turned in every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so God makes Cain a node vagabond, and then Cain establishes a land for vagabond, right? The land of Nod, near the garden, there in the east of Eden, where the tree of life is. So there are two proposals about what's going on. Henry Morris, which is he is an expert on the book of Genesis, and has a lot of good stuff to say. He proposes that it could be that Cain is trying to go back to Eden to try to restore his relationship with God. This is characteristic of Cain. Remember, Cain is always trying to do things his own way. He was trying to offer vegetation instead of life, instead of animals. Now it's as if he might be trying to go back to the Garden of Eden to try to restore his fellowship with God that way, which is the wrong way of doing it, by the way. God has banished man from the Garden of Eden. That's one possibility. I would propose a little bit of a different way. Maybe Cain is now trying to rebel against God. Perhaps he is trying to establish a settlement there in Nod near the Garden of Eden, trying to build up a population. From there, he can organize an attack and try to make a charge on that tree of life. The Bible doesn't say specifically, was it this way or that way? Maybe there was a different way. But it seems to me that Cain is still living in rebellion against God, at this point at least. Okay, Genesis 4:17 begins. Cain had relations with his wife. Stop! This is one that a lot of people really get upset about, and I don't think there really is any need to have any kind of problem with this. Cain had relations with his wife. Here's the big question: where did his wife come from? The biblical options are very few. Either Cain's wife was his sister, or Cain's wife was a niece or great niece, along those lines. The non-biblical options include that there was a non-human wife whom Cain married and called his wife, or that this was a woman who was a unique creation. Now, these are not biblical views. Eve was the mother of all. We see that in Genesis 3:20 when Adam names her. So there wasn't a unique creation, nor was this a non-human, because God created kinds, and the humankind was one kind. We cannot have interbreeding between kinds. So if Cain did have sexual relationships with a non-human, then they would not have had kids. This non-human option is one that people have thought up entirely to justify some kind of an evolutionary aspect here. No, that's not at all the case. It's interesting. There are several doctrines that we defend firmly, right? And the options to the doctrine, I think, are often from reading the Bible and misunderstanding it. So, for example, we'll take the debate between premillennialists and amillennialists. As a premillennialist, I see the reference to 1,000 years in the book of Revelation, and I understand that to mean 1,000 years. The amillennialist sees 1,000 years in the book of Revelation and concludes that that is a spiritual long time. Now, I happen to be quite certain that I am right and the amillennialist is wrong. But how did the amillennialist get there? He got there by misreading the Bible. Okay, if we come back here to Genesis 3:17, Cain had relations with his wife. My friends who say that Cain had relations with a non-human, they did not get that by reading the Bible and somehow misunderstanding it. They got that by taking an idea from outside of the Bible, evolution, which I think is actually quite anti-Bible and contrary to the Bible. And they took that foreign idea and brought it into the text. There's a difference there. There's a difference between reading the Bible and misunderstanding it and taking an idea that is anti-scriptural and putting it into the scriptures. Okay, so we end up then with Cain marrying his sister or his niece, a close relative. People object to that on two grounds, biological and moral. Now, if we look at the alternative here, that Cain married a non-human, then we automatically have some very serious biological problems with a human and a non-human intermarrying. And we still have the moral problem of bestiality. So Cain and his wife is not only a problem for the young earth creationist. In reality, it's a problem across the board. And it just so happens that we, from the young earth creationist perspective, have a very good answer for it. So what exactly is the contention here? The biological objection, we'll take that one first. The biological objection is that mutations tend to be more likely and more problematic whenever we have interbreeding with close relatives. This is quite evident in the world of hybrid dogs, for example. When breeding dogs, the breeders will often breed close relatives. So they'll have inbreeding, and they frequently notice that there are biological problems that come from that. Well, it happens that all of us, and not just dogs, humans as well, we have several mutations within our DNA. Now, contrary to the notion of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, mutations are not good. Mutations tend to be hazardous, harmful to the health. They don't turn turtles into these giant ninjas that can run around in the sewers and do all sorts of cool stuff like talking, right? No, mutations are hazardous to the health. When we have two organisms which are more closely related, these mutations are more likely to be similar between the two, since they come from the same DNA pool. The DNA is likely to have the same problems here and there. And when we combine those and breed them, the mutations are more likely to become manifest and harmful because of the inbreeding, as opposed to breeding with a broader group, so that mutations will be able to cancel each other out, and weak DNA will be able to work out to where it's not as manifestly harmful. There are people groups that have been restricted in their DNA pool, and as a result, sometimes they have similar health problems within the community. So, for example, the Amish community in the United States, it was a relatively small group that immigrated to America together from Europe, and they have married within the same pool for multiple generations, and now they have several health problems that are recurring within the population, for example. Okay, so that is what happens when we have a smaller pool of breeding. When we shrink that all the way down to brother sister, then the problem becomes very problematic very quickly. Okay, so how do we explain this from a creation science perspective? Well, first, I would say that mutations started with the fall. When Adam and Eve sinned, that's when mutations began and the DNA started to deteriorate. Prior to that, they had access to the tree of life, which probably had a medicinal aspect. They probably didn't have to worry about DNA problems as they bred along. Since then, throughout the generations, these mutations have been compiling, so that by the time we get to today, our DNA has all sorts of mutations and problems that Adam and Eve's DNA did not. It must have really been something to see early humans in their form without genetic problems. Now, that's not to say that there would have been no variations with Adam and Eve. All of the DNA code that was necessary for all the variations that we have today, and every variation that we'll have in the future, and every variation between today and back then, all of the information, genetic information, was within Adam and Eve. So they were able to have kids, and it must have been truly amazing to see the variations in not just Adam and Eve, but all the animal world as well, right? They probably had children who were both light-skinned and dark-skinned, and perhaps they had children with light hair and dark hair. So would have been something. Unfortunately, the Bible does not tell us whether Cain and Abel were blonde or if they had really dark skin or what. But it could have been that they were blondes with very dark skin, a combination that you don't see much of today. So with time, variations were available, and with time, the mutations started to compile. So we have more and more and more and more mutations as we go down the line. But the further back we get to Adam and Eve, the less mutations that we would have had. So Cain, being a first generation from Adam and Eve, and his sister being a first generation, or his niece, a second generation, these early generations likely had very few mutations, if any. So there would have been no biological problem with a brother and a sister having children back then, because the mutations would not have been around yet. The variations would have been around, but not the mutations. Okay, so that's the biological objection, and it's easily resolved through a young Earth perspective. More difficult from an evolutionary perspective. Ultimately, the evolutionist has to go back and back and back. And they have the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Apparently, two non-chickens had to have a chicken baby. Then what does the chicken baby do? Either marry its sister or marry a non-chicken, right? Same thing goes with the humans, right? So the biological objection is not problematic for the young Earth perspective. It is problematic for other perspectives. Now for the moral objection. So first of all, there's an icky factor. Ew, brother, sister. I would tend to say that the ick factor is probably more cultural for us than it was for them. Yeah, we can't really put our ick into other cultures necessarily. But the moral objection also goes that the Bible says that it's wrong. And that comes from Leviticus 18:11. Now, Leviticus came about 2,500 years after Cain. So it wasn't until much later that the Bible says, okay, we cannot have brothers and sisters getting married. Now, when God makes something illegal, he does not make it retrospectively illegal. That is to say that it became illegal 2,500 years later, but that is not something that God would have put back on Cain because it was legal back then. It's possible that the biological reasons could have contributed to the moral reasons. Could be that God said, okay, after the fall, now we have mutations. This is something that God would have known about, but Cain probably did not. He did not live around long enough to see a lot of mutations. But God could have said, now that we have mutations, it will take a couple thousand years, but eventually the mutations are going to become hazardous if we have brothers and sisters marrying. So eventually it will become illegal, but I will intervene when that is necessary. Okay, so the moral objection also goes away. All right, so Cain took a wife, probably his sister or niece. And going further in Genesis 4:17, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. He built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Now, the Hebrew name, Enoch, is Hanok, which means dedication. This word Hanok is where we get the word Hanukkah, which is the Feast of Dedications, or the Feast of Light. Right? Now, the Bible does not say what it is exactly that Enoch is dedicated to. Later, we're going to have another Enoch. That Enoch is a righteous man, but that's a different Enoch. It does not give us any indication that this Enoch is a righteous man. We see that his father was a murderer. I tend to think he was further rebelling by his development of the city of Enoch. Okay, so Cain built the city, called it Enoch. Genesis 4:17 begins, to Enoch was born Irad. So the word Ir means city. So it is possible that Irad could mean something kind of like city boy. Irad. The word for boy is yeled, and the verb to give birth is yaled. So this dalet, this d ending to irad, could mean something like that, right? City boy. Now, the city would have been quite an innovation. It would not have been that the generation before Cain had a city, because that was only Adam and Eve, not enough people for a city. But but Cain built a city. Could have been quite a sight to see, a center for the marketplaces, the exchange of ideas. But it could also be that the city could have had an element to it which was rebellion against God. It could be that Cain was trying not to fill the earth, but establishing a city. We see this in the situation with the Tower of Babel in a couple of chapters from now, when man says, no, we are not going to get scattered out and fill the earth. Let's build a name for ourselves here. Okay. It looks like Cain is doing something very similar. He's building a city, naming it after his son, Enoch. He could be building it right there next to the tree, trying to build up a opposition city. What happens in the next generation? We don't know a whole lot, but we do get the names. So, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methushael, and Methushael was the father of Lamech. Now, some of these names are a little difficult. We'll take the name Mehujael, which is Mehuyael in Hebrew. Some say that that name means struck by God, which would imply God's judgment somehow. Others would say that it means God makes me live, which would imply perhaps that there were believers at this time. So the person naming him would have been that Irad, the city boy, right? The guy born in the city, being as how Cain named the city after his son. His son would not have been born in the city, but Irad would have been the first. So it could be that, let's see, this Mehujael would have been the first generation born in the city. And if he is naming him God Makes Me Live, that would kind of imply that Irad was already a believer. Okay. On the other hand, if it means struck by God, then it could be that somehow or another this kid was struck by God, which would imply some kind of a conflict where God is winning. The next name to come out, right? So Mehujael, either God Makes Me Live or struck by God, he names his son Methushael, which people agree would mean who is of God. Okay. So that looks like it's sort of a name for a believers. Okay. So that, of course, assumes, right? Both of these names have that suffix El, God. We're assuming that El, God, is Jehovah and not a false god, which I think is a pretty safe bet there, right? Of course, Cain has cut fellowship from the one true God, so it could be that he is setting up a cult of some sort for a false god. The Bible doesn't truly say that, though. So it seems though, I would think that it's the one true God that Methushael is being named after. So we go back to our question about the purpose of the city, right? If Morris's opinion is right, that Cain went there trying to restore fellowship with God, then it could be that with time over the course of generations, we're seeing something of a revival. We're seeing the generations accept God. If my opinion is right, that Cain is going there out of rebellion, it could be that Cain went out there, started a city, in a couple of generations, we have God striking. Whatever that means precisely is not really given to us. And then after God strikes Mehujael, he has the son Methushael, who is of God. So it's as if Cain is starting a rebellion and he gets beat and God wins. There's a lot of speculation to that. So I could be way off, but we only have what's written. So we got to stick with that and realize that our conjectures are not to be held so dogmatically. Okay, so then Methushael's son was Lamech. This is not to be confused with Noah's son, same or Noah's father, same name. The name Lamech means powerful. Okay, so next time we're going to pick up with Lamech in Genesis 4:19. There's some interesting things to be said about him in the following verses. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Paul Miles, and this has been Season 2, Episode 11 of The Thursday Show.